Give you a trachea bronchium, you can do one for your sinuses. Your bilateral versus unilateral, remember you got two sinuses, two nasal passages, two ears, two eyes. So keep that in mind, right and left, or whether or not it's a bilateral procedure, and beware of the turbulence. And that'll be in your descriptor. You'll see what I mean when you're going through them. Your respiratory system. On slide 127, just giving you an overview of the anatomy. And when you are talking about your larynx and trachea on page 128, or PowerPoint slide 128, again, and you always need to determine whether or not you're looking at open versus endoscope with your approach. And the rule with diagnostic and therapeutic scopes performed in the same operative section. We'll get to that. 122 of your study guide. And if you look at your book, respiratory system, it starts with the nose. You got your drainages of abscesses in the internal nasal cavity, and then the septum, and then your destruction and procedures of nose. Your excision procedures, nose, turbinate. Surgical removal, nose, rhinectomy, partial or total. Permanent injection, removal of foreign substance in the nose, including foreign bodies, requiring general anesthesia. Reconstruction can include rhinoplasty, whether it's primary or secondary. Question whether something's primary or secondary. It's, remember, our secondary diabetes. Secondary means it's due to something else, such as a surgical procedure. If they had to perform something and they had to break the nose, remove it, or whatever, move it out of the way to get to whatever they're doing, they have to do a secondary reconstruction versus a primary. Rhinoplasty for nasal deformity, secondary to congenital cleft lip and or palate. That's another good example of secondary. Let's see what else. Permanent destruction, controlling of nosebleeds. This is by cautery or packing, initial or subsequent, whether it's anterior or posterior. Those are the key words with a lot of your sinus cavities. Nasal endoscopy over on page 97, diagnostic, and this is where a lot of people will get a little sideways. These 31231 through 31235 are diagnostic. They do not include anything other than the actual endoscopy or sinus copy. Now, if you look at 31237 through 31240, you'll find even below that, through 31255, endoscopies with surgical endoscopies, and then with ethmoid removal, and so on. Diagnostic is, my nose is running, can you tell me what's wrong with it? And he looks up your nose with an endoscope, and it's diagnostic endoscopy. But if he gets in there and determines he needs to do a biopsy, you would code something else. They have separate procedure next to 31231, 31233, no, they don't know that one, but on 31231, they've got separate procedure. What happens is people want to code the diagnostic endoscopy separate from the procedural endoscopy, and you can't. It doesn't matter if you remove the scope and insert it back. You can't report both. It shows you on page 123, anytime a diagnostic evaluation is performed, all the areas would be inspected and a separate code is not reported for each area. Diagnostic endoscopy always is included in surgical endoscopy. Tells you the endoscope may be used for biopsy, polypectomy, and debridement 31237, or for more extensive procedures ranging from control of hemorrhage 31238 to ethmoidectomy and more. Highlights in this section include, and it tells you. When you're coding a epistaxis is the medical term for nosebleed. When you're coding a hemorrhage, control 31233, not 308, control nosebleed 30901 or 30905. You're not going to be able to code 30905 control a nasal hemorrhage with a nasal endoscopy. The rules are iffy and sketchy at best, but for the most part, whenever it says diagnostic, that's when nothing's been done. It's diagnostic, and that's it. Don't try to code both. When we get to urinary system, it's going to trip you up big time. Because they've got so many cystoscopies, ureteroscopy, or whatever. I can't even remember. There's a bunch of them. Larynx, incision, removal. Tracheotomy tubes, they're in the respiratory section. There's always something to think about with your trachs is that the trach itself may be the access point for some of the procedures. And if there is, if that's the case, that procedure will have via trach or via gastrostomy or whatever opening that they access to perform the procedure. Just keep that in mind when you're looking through and when you're in your index and you're looking for endoscopy of whatever via tracheostomy or what have you, it'll be there. Page 124 in your study guide. One thing to remember also, you guys haven't been exposed to it, but there's an add-on code 69990 for an operating microscope. It's further on back in your ears, your auditory system codes. It's an add-on code that is very sketchy as well. People try to add that microscope onto everything. It's an operating microscope. However, you aren't going to get reimbursed for something that you have to do anyway. There's no way that you could place tubes in an ear without using an operating microscope. There's no way that you can perform some of the procedures in this respiratory section without an operating microscope. So, and it tells you there, it would not be coded with the direct laryngoscopy for removal of foreign body. It's included. It does not, it says right here, when a CPT code does not include an operating microscope, but an operating microscope was used, you would then code it. Appendectomy, for instance, I always go to that one because it's just a common thing and most people know what I'm talking about. They're not going to use a microscopic, an operating microscope. But if they did, then you would apply that. Usually when it's in intricate parts and it requires an endoscope already, they're using a microscope. Tells you testing technique, that there's guidelines for operating microscope code, the list of codes, when you use it as an inclusive component. It must be in the AMA book. You can get that on CMS website. again in bold on page 124, surgical bronchoscopy is always included in diagnostic when performed by the same surgeon. The only time you would split them up and do code both is if it was separate sessions, separate surgeons. If multiple bronchoscopies are performed, modifier 51 may be applied. Additional highlights in this section include, what they mean there is kind of like the colonoscopies. And a lot of times you may have to actually apply 59. That will rule will break depending on what the actual procedure was. For instance, colonoscopy, they have removal by snare or cold forceps or hot forceps. 3 different lesions removed by 3 different ways via colonoscopy. So you have 3 different codes, but on those you would apply 59 rather than 51 because they were different lesions. Now, if they use snare and then come back on the same lesion and apply something else, then you would apply 51. That's what they're telling you here. If you go and do a bronchoscopy area, whatever, and they do a biopsy and a washing of the same area, in that sense, you would apply 51. 2 different procedures, but on the same thing. I can tell everybody's got dead. We'll stop there. And then we'll start that in the middle of that one. And y'all try the chapter questions on this too. I know y'all are busy and everything, but I can tell you this much, at this point in the juncture, if you can do the ENYM, the anesthesia, and these in at least 80% accuracy and whatever from that we'll get it, at those chapters, you are good to go. Because the ENYM, well, the worst part really is medicine. It's easy, but it's just kind of one of those that has a lot of stuff in it. If y'all have any questions on